Good morning. It's great to see so many of you here. I hope you're all safe and well. Welcome to this, it's the second in a series that we're putting on in the IIA Midlands on governance, risk and internal audit. We had planned to do this as a day event in Warwick Castle back in March, and then we all know what happened. So we've moved it into this weekly series. I hope it's encouraging you to join and so on. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Anne Brooke. I'm an Associate Professor at Birmingham City University, where I look after an MSc in Internal Audit. Yes, you can do a degree in it, yay. And also the Internal Audit Professional Apprenticeship. I've been an IIA Midlands member since, I don't know when, can't recall, it's quite a long time now, and I sit on the IIA Midlands Committee, and I was previously a head of internal audit before I moved to academia about 7 years ago, so I have been there. In terms of the IIA Midlands Committee, I just wanted to kind of talk about what's going on a little in the profession. We're very aware as a committee that a lot of our members are finding themselves in difficult and challenging times in terms of their own career. And we are hearing of things like redundancies and obviously furlough as well is affecting our members. And as a committee, we're really committed to supporting our members through those times. So with that in mind, we're planning a 1 hour online support on the Friday the 11th of December between 10 and 11. It's a chat, a conversation, a discussion. There will be people there who have been made redundant, who have different approaches to their career in the profession. If you are interested in joining that conversation, then if you get in touch with either me or Marina via LinkedIn, and then we will set that up for you. So that just leaves me to introduce today's speaker, which is Marina McQuaid, who I know many of you will already know. I've known Marina for a long time, and she's an extremely experienced head of internal audit, and has moved over and is working in governance, risk and control currently at National Grid, and she's going to talk about her story there. So over to you, Marina.
Thank you, Anne. Good morning. We're a little bit ahead of time and I can see that people are still joining the call. So I'm going to go really slowly for the first 5 minutes just to introduce myself and just to talk about my time at National Grid. As Anne mentioned, I've worked at National Grid in governance, risk and controls for just over a year, but I've been at National Grid for 3 years, helping them on a journey towards excellence in governance, risk management and compliance, which of course also includes audit, assurance and controls. I'm going to tell you this morning about the work that we've been doing at National Grid to transform our risk, assurance, controls and compliance framework and how we've done that, focusing principally on the system that we've put in at National Grid and the transformation programme to transform the business processes around that. Over the past 3 years. It's been a 3-year journey. As Anne mentioned, I'm also an active member of the Institute's committee, and I was previously the chair of the committee for a couple of years and thankfully passed over to Chris Kenny as chair because this role has been incredibly busy and has kept me sane for 3 years. And sometimes a little bit insane, but it's been a fantastic journey and I wanted to share this. I'm really pleased to be able to come and share this journey with you today. I can see we've got 166 of you on the call already. So for those of you who are joining just from the school run as I did, welcome, or caring responsibilities. And we will just move forward to the agenda for today. I've got about, I can't remember, about 20 slides to get through. Some of those we will only dwell on for a couple of minutes and others will focus more heavily on. I've put these slides together over a period of months, and I often use some of these as talking points within National Grid. Some of them relate to the architecture of our new system and our own framework. And all the slides, bar a couple, will be made available to you after the session. So the IIA will put the slides onto the website, I believe, in about a week's time, and the recording will be available to you. But I will probably take out some of those that are specific to National Grid's architecture and risk framework. But what you will be able to take away from today's session will be the actionable strategies that you can take into your own organisations, the guiding principles that we've used, and some of the things that we've learned along the way that I believe should help everybody within the profession if they choose to go down this route. So we're going to talk a little bit about our vision and where and our journey so far, and where we started from and where we've got to today, and something about our vision for the future, some of the challenges and the considerations along the way, and then what our view is looking like for, we're forecasting through to about 2022 as to where we want to get to at this point and what we can see for the foreseeable future. So we've talked a little bit about me. This is me in the summer when it was a little bit more sunny. I am a chartered member of the Institute of Internal Audit, and I'm also a fellow of the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. I've been at National Grid for 3 years, and I am currently the service owner for our GRC system, which is called Archer. So it's a product from RSA, so it's an RSA Archer system, and I am the service owner. So I came into National Grid as an experienced head of audit to look after the audit team's operations, and we'll talk a little bit about the audit team and those operations. And the first thing they gave me to do was to implement a new system, and so that's kind of where I've been for 3 years on this journey. So I started off in the audit team, leading their operations as a member of the senior leadership team, helping them to transform their processes and bring in a new system to do that. But I've now moved across into the legal and group assurance team so that I can continue the journey for National Grid to transform their risk and compliance framework. Prior to National Grid, I was at a number of places as head of audit that you can see on the screen at the bottom. So I was at the Office of Fair Trading for 5 years as head of audit. And I was also, interestingly, whilst I was there, I went to Whitehall and asked if we could form a shared service for all regulatory authorities for the UK. So I was Group Chief Internal Auditor for all regulatory authorities whilst I was at the Office of Fair Trading, which is a fantastic role. But I've also led the audit services for the NEC in Birmingham and for Selfridges, for Claire's across Europe. And I've also done some work in the risk practice, the business risk practice at Grant Thornton and other places. I was trained in the profession as a chartered accountant. So I'm well suited to looking after not only audit operations at National Grid, but also risk management as well. So let's talk a little bit about National Grid's vision. National Grid is a very large FTSE 100 PLC in the UK. It is actually a global company in as much as 50% of its business is in the UK. And it's in the UK, it owns, manages and operates the high pressure gas national transmission system for the whole of the UK. And it also owns the electricity transmission network for England and Wales. So our job is to deliver reliable, safe and affordable electricity and gas for all of our customers. We have 2 other parts to the business. One of these on the bottom of the screen on the right is National Grid Ventures. That's where all the exciting stuff happens. It's a competitive division, so less regulated in that sense of the gas and electricity regulation for the UK. but it operates National Grid Ventures as a global company. And I say global, we're really 50% UK and 50% America. So when I say global, that's principally where we operate. And National Grid Ventures is all about renewable energies, smart meters, connecting our systems in the UK with certain countries in Europe. So we have interconnector pipelines under the sea with France and Denmark and other countries that are close to the UK, where we can balance our system of gas and electricity on demand as needed to increase and decrease the amount within the UK as necessary, and support our partners abroad. We also do liquefied natural gas, battery storage, wind, solar power, and all the green energies, and we're absolutely at the forefront of the climate change discussion, the renewable energies and green energies for the UK. And we even have an electric vehicles division, because obviously that's part of the future for the UK. So that's National Grid Ventures. We have a separate legal entity that was spun off last year, I think it was, called the Electricity System Operator. And that has made a very interesting dynamic for our journey at National Grid in our risk and compliance framework, because we have to service that in certain ways with some of our shared service areas. For example, we operate, the UK business operates the billing, HR, finance, etc. for the Electricity System Operator, but we have to keep the information, the transactions, the processes completely separate, legally separate, and that has presented us with some interesting challenges for this shared platform that we've introduced for our governance, risk and compliance framework. Talk a little bit about the US. We're also serving 20 million people in the US with gas and electricity supplies. We have an electric business, a gas business unit, the wholesale networks and capital asset division, but we also have three major regulatory divisions. So it's a matrix of business areas within the US, and it makes for quite a complex operating model and quite different from the UK's operating model, which I do think is a little bit simpler, but this is a matrix. So we have three main jurisdictions. We operate on the eastern side or northeastern side of the US, so Boston, and so think Boston, New England and New York in principle, and it represents at least 50% of our business. So we are global in as much as that happens. And I want to talk a little bit and set the scene around governance, risk and compliance at National Grid. We have structured ourselves with three principal operating areas within National Grid. So we think of it as three big business areas: UK, US and NGV. But in addition, when we're thinking about our framework and our processes and systems, we also have to be mindful of the ESO, the Electricity System Operator, that is legally separate. And we have to think about how we can incorporate them in our shared group-wide policies, but keeping their stuff separate. And we have to think about corporate centre, which obviously holds the group policies. And there are a number of assurance functions, governance, risk, assurance and audit functions that come under corporate centre. And that's absolutely where corporate audit, which is our internal audit division, sits. So this is our third line of defence. And we also have a number of centralised second line of defence functions. So SOX financial control, group assurance, which is where the risk management team are. ERM is our risk management team. Ethics and compliance, records management, one or two others such as network reliability and compliance in the US, and we have US regulatory and non-regulatory compliance in here as well. And then we have our IT risk assurance and policy functions sitting in corporate centre, and functions such as property, HR, procurement and programme assurance. There are a whole host of them that kind of are masked in here that I haven't listed all of them, but those are the main ones. So these I would regard as our centralised, group-wide, global assurance functions, or assurance risk and compliance functions. But in addition to that, we have two very different operating models. Not only is National Grid structured quite differently between the UK and the US, but we also have in the UK each operating division or business area, such as gas, electricity business, health and safety, capital delivery. Each of those has its own assurance function, and each of those would have risk champions and compliance champions who help to manage, record, champion the risk and compliance framework within their own businesses. In the US, we have a slightly different picture. We have one main centralised second line business assurance function, and until quite recently that was the case. Now we're starting to see a similar thing happen in the US that we've seen in the UK, which is where our gas business has asked for to establish a gas assurance function. We're probably likely to see the same for capital delivery, safety, and electricity and wholesale networks, etc. going forward. But currently, two quite different models for second line, where we have operational assurance functions attached to each business area in the UK, but in the US, a main centralised one that's kind of covering across all of the functions. But we're starting to see this change and this switch across to the business unit model that we have in the UK. And then we have National Grid Ventures, our non-regulatory arm, our competitive division, which has a combined risk assurance and compliance function. So three quite different business models for us to get our head round. And all of this represents, at my last count, I think it was something like 35 different teams. I think when we started out on this journey, we had in our sights about 20 of those teams in scope for this programme of sharing a governance, risk and compliance platform. But as we've gone through and we're growing and we're developing, we're now starting to see about 35 of those opening up, and we're not done yet, and we may not end up with that model ultimately, but that's the picture for you to have in your minds. So where were we in 2017 and 18? Well, we had quite a sorry picture. So when I arrived in 2017 at National Grid, this was the picture. We had a bunch of teams within group assurance and IT assurance, some of those centralised functions, that were using a system called RSA Archer, and it was an old version 5.5, and they shared that. But these 5 teams were on a shared platform, but they had separate processes. They had built customised solutions. None of those solutions talked to each other, and so there was no sharing of data and information despite sharing a platform. And actually, they were completely siloed, and they had very expensive licenses because they were what's called on-demand applications. They were built from scratch and customised to the processes at National Grid. So actually, this was a system that had been put in some years before, about 6 years before, and it wasn't really working for National Grid. In addition, you can see here some of those some of the group assurance functions were operating separate systems, and some of them were still on Excel spreadsheets and SharePoint. And in some cases, we had the ridiculous scenario whereby in the legacy Archer system, the ethics team in the US were using the legacy system for their processes, but in the UK, we had an ethics and business conduct team who were their mirror team, and they had very slightly different processes, but the UK was still using spreadsheets and PowerPoint and Word and SharePoint. So actually you had two completely separate and siloed processes, and you had different platforms, different software and methodologies to achieve the same output. So quite a sorry state. And so National Grid set about with a steering committee and set a vision for the future for governance, risk and compliance. And our vision is to enable National Grid to have a single platform that integrates its various risk assurance, controls and compliance programs, which demonstrates effective regulatory compliance and enables risk-based decisions. And what I would actually say there is that it enables better risk-based decisions. We haven't amended the definition, but I think that is really our aim. And, you know, we needed to be able to identify and have early warning where a compliance breach was going to occur, where risk was increasing. We couldn't see any of this. There was quite different things going on, and it was very siloed. But this was our vision that we set in 2017. And what would that actually mean? And I'm sorry that the writing is quite small, but I just want to kind of have a look at what that vision actually means for us. It meant that we will have a single source for risk and controls data in Archer. So Archer is the platform that we chose from RSA, that we would have a single version of the truth where all of our risks and controls and compliance information was held. No more paper templates, no more Excel spreadsheets, and that we would have this information in there quality checked using a common risk language and a common risk taxonomy and shared values and aligned processes. And from all of that repository of information, what we want is trusted insights where we can see trends and we can get alerts, we understand where our hotspots are, and we understand the combined effect of the work of all of those assurance, risk and compliance teams, so that we could identify where we had particular processes that have problems, particular business areas, or particular kinds of issues that are occurring in different parts of our organisation. And we would have reports and dashboards available real-time, on demand, 24/7, organisation-wide, and at every business and function level that we can think of. We would also have an integrated approach to risk and compliance so that our technology and governance and our processes are updated and integrated to reflect the new operating model. And this new capability would give us new ways of working. We were absolutely determined from the outset that we would end up with a platform that was not customised, that was capable of making sure that our processes were aligned, that our language is harmonised, and that we could combine the effect of all of those teams to give us output for the board's use to understand our business better. And that meant that we had, and we'll talk a bit more about this later on, that we had a guiding principle of non-customisation, but also what that meant was that we took the mantra on that we would bend our processes to meet the technology. And that was not a popular view at that time, and sometimes it's still levelled at us to this day, that we would assess the technology, that it was going to be effective for meeting our vision. We would be ruthless about not customising it. And that would mean that we would want our teams to bend their processes to align and harmonise with each other and to be capable of working with the Archer system so that we could drive that vision forward. And also that we would drive some of the accountability. One of the other things that we haven't talked about is our first, second and third line of defence model in National Grid. We have a very strong model and vision for our first, second and third line of defence. We operate the 3 lines of defence model. But what we found was that our second line of defence was not operating very effectively at that time. That there was a real mix of different teams. But also there were some teams that were operating almost as a mini independent internal audit function for their business area. And there were others that were operating more as a sort of supercharged first line function. And there was a real mix of activity happening in our second line. So we wanted to make sure that in doing this, we had very clear lines and roles and responsibilities to create clear risk and controls ownership, that we had standard and defined ways of working, and that we had effective established governance with clear escalation routes, and people were upskilled accordingly, that we had the right capabilities in the right roles, and we had the right activities happening across our 3 lines of defence model. So we set off on our journey, and we established a steering committee to oversee the future GRC process and system strategy. And the first thing they did was to endorse that we would have best practice GRC processes, implemented through the through the system solution that we bought from RSA Archer. And we made a very sensible, I think, and really advantageous decision very early on in this process. So when I arrived at National Grid in 2017, the steering committee had been set up, and KPMG had been employed as an implementation partner. When we built the legacy Archer system some years prior to that, National Grid had put it in by themselves, and they'd ended up with this system that didn't really work for the organisation as a whole. Nothing was shared, everything was siloed, and the licenses were enormously expensive because there were 5 on-demand customised licenses. And bringing in a partner, an implementation partner, we were looking for somebody to not just put the system in with us, but also to help shape that future vision around our risk and compliance framework, and to ensure that as we built the system out, that we absolutely had excuse me, business transformation at the heart of it. Sorry, excuse me. It's going to be a long morning if I'm going to have to cough my way through it. This is not COVID, I promise. So, so we had an implementation partner through KPMG who helped us. So really we brought them in to help us from a consultancy perspective with shaping that vision and making sure that we were a business transformation programme and not a technology transformation programme. And that's been our mantra from the very beginning. And we set out to do the first 2 phases through 2017 and 2018. And I was in the corporate audit team, and we made a tactical decision, the steering committee made a tactical decision to go slowly and go in phases. And so we wanted to build the new platform for the corporate audit and financial control processes first, so the Sarbanes-Oxley compliance processes. And so these were prioritised as being the first modules that would be built on the Archer platform. Archer is predicated on having a core data model. It has information in it that is shared across the organisation. So, for example, you can, and we'll talk about this a bit more in a while, you can map your assurance and audit work into your corporate objectives, which sit in a database, and you literally select which of those objectives is relevant for that particular piece of audit work. That's a very simple example, but it has a number of elements to that core data model, and we're going to have a look at that in a little while. And then later on, we knew right from the outset that actually this was a governance, risk and compliance system, and that whereas we needed to prioritise corporate audit and SOX. So corporate audit was on a legacy system that was about to expire and wasn't really working for the team anymore. I don't think they were really properly using it. They were just logging the final outcome of their audits in the system and using it for reporting. And the SOX teams were on spreadsheets and desperately needed a system because we couldn't get the combined effect of what was going on in the SOX space. So that's why they were prioritised, and that's why we took the tactical decision to implement them first. But we always knew that we needed risk and compliance at the heart of this system if we were going to make the best use of it and we were going to achieve a business transformation in terms of our GRC processes. And so phase 3, we're just coming out of now in 2020. It's been a very long phase, which I'll come on to in a little while. It's been one of the most interesting phases, but we are there and we have got risk and compliance on the platform as well. From the outset, and this is one of the things that I'd like to really focus on with you for a little while, and the writing again, I'm sorry, is quite small. But from the outset, we had some really clear keys to our success. One of those, the first one is that we wanted to identify and empower champions from each business area to drive consensus and make critical decisions about how we built the Archer platform for National Grid. It was absolutely critical, and I would encourage anybody who is introducing a new system to not just have a small working group. There were 2 of us leading for corporate audit. So I led and I had an auditor assigned to me. And quite frankly, between the 2 of us, together with the leadership, we could have made all the decisions about the system. I have an extremely experienced career behind me as a head of audit. I had an auditor who could tell me about National Grid's particular audit processes, and we had the leadership fully engaged in that process, and we could have made all the decisions. But we made a conscious decision to establish a network of 10 auditors. We're a 50-strong audit department at National Grid across the UK and the US. And it's split between different teams. So we have a UK team, a US team, we have an audit team, an IT audit team, and a safety audit team within those regional areas. So we split our champion population. We selected 10 individuals across those different areas, but also across the different seniority levels. So we had auditors and we had managers, and we had a lead on the well, I was the lead on the leadership team, but we also had a head of audit assigned to us as our main point of contact. And of course, the global head of audit was fully engaged as well. And that was absolutely critical to making sure that the right decisions were made for all levels of our function and all levels. The SOX team did something similar. They didn't have quite as many, but they had a champion population as well. And we managed to deliver a system for those 2 teams that was on time, under budget, and really has driven the success of those 2 areas in terms of their maturity and in terms of the insights that are now being created from the system. And I think this particular, and I'm only on the first one, but that particular aspect was definitely down to a key to success, which is having a group of champions from the whole team engaged in helping with design, gathering the requirements, going through the build sessions, testing the system with you. And actually, it was our champions who delivered the training out to everybody else. So we took a decision early on that we would train the audit and SOX teams from the programme team that was assigned from those teams, so myself and the auditor who was on the programme team with me. But actually, we handed over all of the training to our own champions within audit to share their knowledge and to help cement their knowledge first and then share that with the rest of the team, and to walk the floors with them afterwards so that we had a body of people who could walk the floors and make sure that everybody was able to use the system from day one. We worked in small and nimble teams so that we could execute quickly. So as I said, for audit, there was myself and James, and then for SOX, there were 2 people there who were the leads. So small teams, big champion population. We've already talked about out-of-the-box features of Archer, so non-customised. We pride ourselves on sticking to out-of-the-box. When I came to National Grid and they said, we've bought the RSA Archer system and we'd like you to implement it for corporate audit, I was extremely sceptical. as far as I was concerned, RSA were a security software company. I'd never really heard of them in the audit space. I'd heard of Teammate and Pause Pentana and, you know, ID and all sorts of other systems, but I'd never heard of Archer, and so I was quite sceptical. But actually, as we went through the requirements and design process, it was very clear to me that not only was it very comprehensive in what it could handle for audit, so everything from annual planning through the engagement right through to actions management as the three main areas, but also that it met the IIA requirements very, very clearly. And, you know, I was actually very impressed with the product, having gone through implementations in other organisations prior to that. I was quite sceptical, but actually I was delighted to see. And so that meant that we could, as far as possible, stick to the out-of-the-box configuration, and we did a lot of label changing and minor configuration, but largely I'd say 85% of the platform today is non-customised. We were able to lean on our strong partner at KPMG and to leverage programme management functions within National Grid and the steering committee to make sure that we had rigorous planning and tracking. And then we had meaningful and structured change controls around the system and around the development of the system and effective communications, which was absolutely key to getting this in right first time. What's really interesting is that we've continued with this approach throughout the 3 years, and I don't see that abating anytime soon. We are continuously developing Archer, and I see that continuing for some time. And we're looking at how these actionable strategies, these guiding principles, have given us the ability to continue leveraging that out-of-the-box functionality, creating process efficiency, making it easy for our users is one of our mantras, making the user journey easy, and making sure that we have good accountability. So we've actually taken those guiding principles and they have become some of our enduring principles for change. I think the other one that isn't specifically written on here, but I think that one of the biggest considerations is having our vision. We have an uncompromising view that we will always follow our vision. If a change is requested that does not meet that vision, and the particular area that I'm talking about is an integrated risk management framework, if the change leads back into siloed working, we will reject it and we will debate it and we will think about if there are other ways, but we will look to see what that team is. We will also look to see what that team is actually doing with their processes, how they're using the system, and whether we can get them to achieve what they want in terms of that change request, or get them to work differently, or train them better, or help them a little bit, so that we do not breach and compromise that view of having a fully integrated system going forward. And it hasn't been easy, but it has been enormously helpful to have that vision, that really strong vision at the heart of every decision that we make within this programme to change and transform our governance, risk and compliance at National Grid. So we put in audit and SOX, and I'll talk about those a little bit more in a little while, but I wanted to share with you where we ended up in our third phase, which we're just coming to the end of, literally, drum roll please, I think it will be at the end of this weekend. So phase 1 and 2, we established the system, we established the core data model, and we got corporate audit and SOX on board, and they have been live for 2 years. In 2019, we started phase 3. In early 2019, I think it was January, and we're just finishing it now. And what we've actually ended up with is 4 separate types of activity that kind of split it across this nearly 2 years of work. We wanted it to be done by December, and actually some of the policy decisions and technical issues that we've had to face particularly over the last, where are we now, November, so 11 months, has caused us to have the last piece in the puzzle be deployed this weekend. But we realised that this was a huge phase, and we'd actually bitten off an awful lot of work, but we have now achieved it all. So we put 2 modules into the systems for audit and SOX in 2017 and 18, and now we brought in 8 additional modules in this phase across our risk management, group assurance teams, IT risk policy and assurance team, and that full body of work, although it's 8 modules, was 15 teams. And the reason for that is because another of our uncompromising positions was that we would create global modules. No longer would we have processes that are group-wide activities and processes. So that situation of the US ethics team being on the shared platform but unable to share with other teams, and our UK business being on spreadsheets. We created a global ethics module. We got the UK team and the US team together, and we looked at what they were doing, and uncompromisingly we harmonised, we aligned, we negotiated, and we brought their processes together. And that was things like, if you think about findings ratings, so the outcomes of everybody's work, we had teams that would grade high, medium and low. We would have another team that would grade high, medium and low, and it would mean something slightly different. We had the corporate audit team had priority levels 1, 2 and 3, and I can't even remember what some of the other teams had. But we would get those teams round the table, and not only would we make sure that a team across 2 territories or 3 territories now shared common processes, we were able to build one global module for all of their processes together, but also we would harmonise and align across all of those different areas, so risk, audit, assurance. We got round the table and we set up quite strong governance committees to align things like, at a very tactical level, the gradings for findings. And that's just one area out of many that I can share with you. But we achieved it. And actually, what I found coming in from other organisations was that here was a culture of people really willing to collaborate. And that has been one of our major keys to success. Strong governance, strong chairing of a user governance committee, at which we decided to collaborate with each other and ensure that we could align our processes and align things like our findings grades to mean the same things, roughly the same things, to encompass everybody's view and vision and needs within that, and create definitions that people could say, yes, I can work with that. And that was the attitude with which most people came to the table. So not easy, but we have ended up with 8 modules for 15 teams alongside, I mean, SOX was 4 teams, and they did a similar process, and they worked alongside audit to harmonise the first piece around the build of this system. We also migrated some compliance processes, obviously, from the legacy system, so that was a separate position. So in building those 8 modules, some of those teams came across, but in doing that, we obviously had to bring them into a non-customised place if we could. So we had to alleviate some of their pain points that they had from operating within the legacy system, and we had to get them to participate in that harmonisation and alignment across the different teams. We then integrated our Archer system. So we integrated this GRC system with our Active Directory to ensure that we could communicate out of the system, so send notifications out to individuals, and we could set up roles and access roles for the use of Archer. We've now integrated with our IT ServiceNow system, which brings in IT assets into the system so that when our IT auditors in particular, but anybody working on the system, if they are auditing for a particular server database application or a set of controls connected with those, then they can map their work to those, but we don't maintain the records in Archer for the maintenance of those IT assets, those servers, applications and databases for National Grid. They are maintained in our ServiceNow IT system, and they feed across into Archer and become visible in Archer so that the assurance and audit and risk teams can map their work. And so this particular server database or application is relevant to my work that I'm working on now. And they can enhance the richness of the data back into ServiceNow as well. And we've recently enabled, the bit that's going live this weekend, is we've enabled external vendor access through a vendor portal. This will allow two things. Firstly, our IT security team, our security assurance team, who vets our vendors as they come into National Grid, was previously working on a series of spreadsheets and communication by email with those vendors to vet whether they met National Grid standards and policies and had the requirements, the right security requirements in place for carrying out work on behalf of National Grid. And now we're able to make that exchange of information and record it all. The process is run through Archer for that assurance work, but the questionnaire and the exchange of information between us and our vendors can now go out through this vendor portal directly from the Archer system to the vendor, and the vendor can send back in their answers with the relevant evidence, and it uploads directly into Archer for our teams to pick up. The other use that we've got for our vendor portal, which I'm really excited about, is that we often use co-source provision for, in this particular case, the first team that will use it is our SOX. Testing is carried out by a third-party provider, and it means that that third-party provider can be trained on the Archer system and can access it directly from their own laptops through the vendor portal, and they can work in our SOX module to put their the results of their testing and the work that they've carried out on our behalf directly into Archer, and no longer will they have to send that in on a spreadsheet and one of our SOX teams has to upload that. So that's very exciting for us, and it brings incredible opportunities in other places as well. And the last piece that we're doing, which is, or that we're in the process of doing, is Archer's great. It has good reporting and it has dashboards in it, but it's quite basic pie charts and bar charts to demonstrate what's happening with the outcomes of the work of all of these teams. But we wanted to make sure that we could have executive grade, visually enhanced dashboards for interactive working. And I do have a very small vision of those in this pack, but I'm not going to share. I'm afraid I can't share them in kind of, you know, nice presentable format because they have real data in them. But you will get an idea of what we've got. That's brilliant. In fact, here they are. So these are our dashboards on the left. So where are we now? So we're now at 2020, and we've got 20 teams who have collaborated in a single system. We have a core data model. We have a common language. They collaborate in these global modules, and they have processes harmonized across the regional operations, and they have common categorizations for reporting the outcomes of their work. And all of the data is capable of being linked and shared under relevant access controls and data sharing agreements. And it's brought some challenges because we have, you know, third line sitting in here alongside our second line at the moment, and we're about to think about how we get our first line to participate in this as well. But here's all the teams now sitting in a shared repository, and we have on-demand enhanced reporting dashboards, and these are some of them over here, and they're very small on purpose, as I said. But what you can see is we've got, these are very interactive. So they have dials and charts setting out the position. So I think one of these sets out the position of controls. So how many controls have been tested, what the outcomes of those controls are, and what findings have happened in whose areas, by individual, by teams, by function, by organisation. We have some nice filters at the top of those where we can filter on a particular group, region, function, business area. And at the bottom here, when you hover over or click into one of these, so this might be a little round chart of controls, for example, showing, I don't know, which ones are effective and not effective, and you could click on and you can actually get the detail underneath. So this is actually data coming through from Archer that shows the detail immediately underneath of what's in that control or test or finding or remediation plan. This is quite interesting. I think we've actually dropped this as a graphic, but this particular graphic is the themes. So all of our findings from all of our audit and assurance work, compliance work, ethics work, etc., has outcomes, and those where a control fails or a compliance has been breached or there's an ethics allegation that has been confirmed, there will be findings that are raised as a result of that, you know, or an audit where, you know, you've got findings in an audit report. And these are now all themed around, originally it was 9 themes that we agreed on across all teams. And these are root causal themes based on COSO. So things like an outcome that is as a direct result of having an inadequate process or design of a process, or it could be that, I can't even think, but you can think of all the root causes. So human factors, you know, laws and regulations have been breached, and whatever. So we started out with, I think we were looking to have a body of about 6 to 8. We compromised with 9, and when we brought in some of the compliance areas over the past year, we've actually ended up with 12 because they have particular root causal themes that don't apply elsewhere. And I think even corporate audit decided that they wanted to split out from inadequate processes or inadequate design of processes. They wanted to split out management information specifically for their purposes that would give a more granular view as to why that's occurring, and that could be weak management information or inadequate or something of that sort. But the great thing is that we not only now have our findings all graded in the same way, but we can also theme them across the organisation. And we have, and here's our integrations at the bottom. And this is the Archer system. This is our solution architecture. This is our architecture on a page where we are today. And I just want to share with you how it works. So we talked about 10 modules now. Audit and SOX were first, and then we built these other 8 modules here. So these are the processes for risk assurance and compliance teams. And the one that we don't have, of course, is our second line operational assurance teams, because we've prioritised firstly audit and SOX, but then the body of assurance teams that are group-wide, corporate centre, centralised functions, so ethics, compliance, IT, records management. These were the ones that needed a system, and we needed to have at the heart, we needed to have our compliance and risk in the system alongside our audit and SOX. But we also very rapidly now need to go into our 4th phase to bring in our second line assurance functions as well. And we're looking at how we do that. Do we build them one assurance module and make them all play nicely in the same assurance module? Bearing in mind they're different business areas, and that may work and that may not, and it's going to be predicated on whether we can get a common assessment of controls and that all of them can buy into that. or do we actually let them have access through the enterprise risk management module so that every control is linked to a risk and that they then test that control coming through this ERM module? But in essence, you have here a critical mass of centralised assurance, risk and compliance functions in National Grid, including our second and third lines of defence. Underpinning that, you have a number of shared applications in National Grid, in the Archer system. So the risk repository underpins all of these. The controls library underpins all of these. And then what we call issues management. So findings is a shared application. Remediation, which is action plans for remediating the outcomes of all of the work. And these are shared across. Now, when I say shared across, that means they are capable of being shared across all of these teams, which of course gives an interesting dynamic when you mix the third line that wants to remain independent and wants to potentially not allow visibility into their module of the working papers that are held in here. So in this audit management module, you have the audit planning, the annual planning, the audit engagements, the work papers, the findings, and the solutions. But the findings are sitting in this, actually go into this database down here, and they are capable of being shared across here, but everything is under access control. So the audit team would have to give you a role, or would have to create a role to say that, you know, the ethics or SOX compliance or the main compliance, I can't see global compliance program. So the compliance teams can see the audit findings to see whether there is anything relevant that can impact on that compliance obligation and potentially could lead to a breach. And the ERM team can see whether it's going to potentially identify that we should review the risks that are sitting here and are linked, and it can trigger that where the audit team is saying that their work was relevant to a particular risk, it could trigger a review. But it's only if they choose to allow an access role for ERM and global compliance into that audit module. And that therefore means that they will see the findings that those teams, that the audit team have created. So everything is under access control and by agreement, and we're just starting to share and to learn how to make those agreements across teams. So we've already made some key decisions that the enterprise risk management module will be available to all of these teams for read-only purposes, so that everybody can read the risks from all of these areas. So that's the shared applications. But we also talked about the core data model earlier, and I just want to share with you the 4 or 5 elements here. I think I've captured them all, but it's so vast. You know, sometimes I think, oh, I must go back and just double check that I have got it all, but it gives you an idea. So all of our organisation is broken down into business areas. So the gas business, the electricity business in the UK or in the US are different business areas, and functions. If I think about finance is a business area or an organisation, and within finance you have treasury, financial control functions. So think of it that way. We have our regions, global, UK, US. We have our jurisdictions, which we have, which we call UK for the Ofgem jurisdiction. But within the US, we obviously have New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. I think there's a couple of others as well. And we have our operating companies. And the reason why this is relevant is because you have to structure this right so that everybody is able to report in a consistent way. And you can map your work in a consistent way so that where we share risks, and those risks are relevant to the electricity business in the UK, that everybody has an understanding and selects from the same set of organisations. It just wouldn't work if we had it structured differently. At the moment, we manage this information manually. We maintain it as a manual list that we upload and we look after as a team, as a service support team. But in the future, this information will be fed from our people system. Our people system is also new, so we're looking at integrating that information, because obviously every time we change the structure of the organisation or we move people around within that, it will be sitting in our people system, and that's the right place for it to sit. We don't really want to manage this within Archer. We want it to be fed into Archer from a source, a system of source. Similarly, we talked earlier about the IT and business assets, so sites, facilities and IT assets, and the IT ones are fed from our ServiceNow IT system. We're looking for a system of choice, a source system to feed our business processes. Currently, we manually load those in, so as you create a piece of audit work, you look to see if there are business processes that one of these other teams has already established or one of the audit team has already established, and you can select it, or you can look up, or you can create a new business process. As we're starting to ramp up and work with Archer, we started by populating for each audit, for each SOX control. Now we're getting to a complete body of work, and we're looking for a source system, because this is no longer a sustainable way to manage our business processes in Archer. And similarly, our corporate objectives. And when we talk about laws and regulations, the beauty of having a GRC system is that it also has a body of laws and regulations, so Sarbanes-Oxley legislation, NIST from an IT standards and regulatory perspective, and GDPR are three examples of the 60 or 70 laws and regulations that are maintained by RSA, and we get uploads regularly for those. They're in here, and again, you can map your work. So this compliance function here is network reliability in the US. It's also a piece of legislation, and all of the work that's in here is mapped into those laws and regulations. In the future, we want to be able to, every time that legislation is updated, it's linked to controls, and it will trigger for the control to be reviewed in line of the new regulation that comes in. That's called regulatory content analysis, and that's a piece of software that we're looking to add into our estate in our roadmap, so that we will have true updating and up-to-date controls, and we're triggering a review based on legislative and regulatory changes outside of National Grid. This is just about our Power BI. Which is the tool that we use with Archer to build those dashboards. This is another view of our dashboards. We're currently creating what we're calling a C-suite dashboard. This combines the information across all of those teams. It will give an aggregated view of risks here on the left, and you can click on these risks, and you can see all the remediation plans that are associated with that risk. This actually shows the teams that you've just seen the modules for, and these are UK global, UK regions, I think, and it just gives you an idea of the size, the number and the status of the remediations that are in progress. I think this is similar for the findings themes. This is something else I can't remember, but you get the drift. That actually what we want to do is give to our executives a view that tells them where the hotspots are for their organisation, within the functions in their organisation, and they can drill down into the data, and they can look at thematic risk profiling and link risks, controls and assurances on demand in a way that is visually appealing. We did all of this work. This is part of our journey so far. I'm so thrilled that we won an award, and the award came from RSA for their customers, and it was at the summit in 2020, just a couple of months ago, and they singled out National Grid as setting the bar for implementing a best-in-class integrated risk management programme. So I'm absolutely thrilled that's me holding the award. And all of this work, we needed a support model. So we've centralised support. So I'm now the service owner, and I have 4 people working with me to manage the system. So do think about this. If you're thinking about doing this, you must think about the ongoing enduring support. But we needed a business support team. This is not IT support. We have IT support that coordinates and interfaces for all of those business teams, because what we don't want is everybody inundating IT and asking for the same change to the system, but in slightly different ways. So we coordinate and interface across all those business teams and work with the IT support team to make sure that we're changing the system in the right way and developing it in the right way. We maintain admin oversight for the platform, and we manage that core data model to make sure that it's consistent. And those enduring principles we've brought into now a BAU, so those are the same ones that you saw earlier. You'll get a copy of these in the pack. And we have the vision, and we use these enduring principles and this vision to look at changes to the system. And we also have, a hierarchy of governance around where that goes. So at the smallest end, we have a team of each module, each business area, so audit, SOX, compliance, etc., risk. It has a lead administrator from that business team, and they come together as a team of business application support or business administration support members, and we meet fortnightly to look at changes to the system and how we're continuously developing and the impact of all the implementation work that's been going on. So small and medium changes are highlighted at that meeting, and any that impact particularly are large changes, or particularly will impact on the way in which we work with Archer or have a significant impact on processes across the risk assurance and compliance community, will go through to a user governance and change committee, which we established and which I chair as service owner, and that has all the leaders from those business teams sitting on it. So they come together as a coordinated council of people who can decide whether the impact on the way of working or the business process is right and proper and appropriate for meeting our vision moving forward. A little bit on the challenges and the considerations. So what went well? So having a creative, supportive partner to help us, making sure our processes were aligned to our vision, setting up that user governance forum that I've just talked about, so early involvement and consistent collaboration across audit, SOX, IT and IT and assurance teams and ERM. The US and the UK regionally focused teams collaborating to form global solutions. Getting rid of our on-demand customised applications and modules. Having an external profile with RSA has brought tangible benefits, and that's everything from when we couldn't get our teams off the legacy system quickly enough. Our license, I think, expired in July, and having RSA partner with us in that sort of collaborative community. So being an active member of the user group, speaking at their conference and just supporting them with doing reference site visits for others who are thinking about having Archer, and doing things like this where I'm talking about this system to a community of audit teams and auditors, has brought real tangible benefit, because when we couldn't get our teams off the legacy system to meet the license end date, RSA allowed us to continue operating for a further 6 months without charging us a penalty or any extra cash, because of all of that work that we've done together to demonstrate that this was a platform that was capable of more than many of its customers had already done. So that was really, really good. And then having the organisational executive dashboards, they've been really well received around National Grid, and I'm absolutely delighted. Some of the challenges we faced, so we had changes in our IT policy that impacted our architecture design, and we had to go back to the drawing board, which is why this phase has been nearly 2 years. It impacted on our ability to do the ServiceNow integration, to build the vendor portal this year, and that was things like changing from the single sign-on to multi-factor authentication, which of course is necessary security policy. But we had to do a lot of work to amend our design to drive multiple parties and stakeholders to alleviate the pain points around some of that. So watch out for things that are happening outside of your programme that are going to impact, because they can sometimes come out of left field. We've always had the risk of customisation to accommodate visibility concerns. So this is around our second and third line of defence and keeping our audit team. So that idea of risk champions being able to see into the audit module was unpalatable to the corporate audit team for obvious reasons. We wouldn't want them to see into the work papers, but we might want them to see if audit is working with those risk records in some way. So we worked with the SOX and audit teams to overcome their concerns, to make sure that we've got the right visibility, but also we've got the right access control. And then we also had a framework of risk. I mean, part of the driver for doing all of this was because National Grid didn't have a full ERM framework in place. They talked a lot about current risk, net risk, that the organisation, and they started their process with net risk, but they didn't think about inherent risk and what was the risk that was inherent in an activity, and they didn't understand that by doing that and looking at inherent risk, they could only by doing that they could get the control framework right, and that then leads to current risk. So we needed to plug those ERM process gaps and make sure that we introduce inherent risk in the right way. And the Archer system helped us to do that. We needed to introduce key risk indicators. We needed to think about risk appetite and the automated scoring. So now we have in the system, by working together on this, we are now able, every time a control fails, we are able to see the impact of that on the current risk. We are able to see the full impact of all controls that are managing a risk, and the scoring changes. It triggers a review of the risk for the scoring to change potentially because the control opinion changes. So every time there's a finding or an outcome telling us that a control is weak, it will trigger a risk review, and the scoring is automated within the system. And we had the potential for a strategy or governance void because we started this with a tactical decision to put in a technology platform, but actually we've now, running alongside this for the last 2 years, we have had a risk and control transformation programme on the use of Archer. Some of our key considerations were the sequencing of notifications. When were we going to switch on notifications in a way that didn't annoy our executives by suddenly getting 100 notifications in their inbox? So understanding our notifications that we're firing out of Archer, what they say, how they land, when they land, and what will happen when somebody clicks on the link, what will they see, and what are they able to do. So getting some of that sequencing right around that and our second and first line rollout has been really important. Access and visibility is a huge area that is complex and difficult and really important to get right. And we have, in National Grid, we have some really tricky considerations, particularly our regulatory and legal separation of our businesses, and how that enables and disables access accordingly and visibility in our dashboards. And having Power BI, which is currently not integrated with Archer, we export from Archer into Power BI, but we're looking for a native connection so that all the access permissions we've created in Archer feed directly into Power BI, but we currently operate something called row-level security, which I won't go into today, but we have a separate security and access for the Power BI suite, which causes us just some really difficult working. but we're working through it and we will get there. And then some of the alignment that I've already talked about. So, key success factors: a detailed and clear project plan, effective governance, good business engagement, close coordination between the teams, and balanced communication across all stakeholders. Aligning our risk transformation, I can see we're nearly running out of time, so I'm just going to whip through the last few. I'm not sure how many more I've got to go, but I just wanted to share the alignment across the risk programme. So making sure that our business transformation programme for transforming risks and controls is absolutely aligned with Archer was key. And that's not just here looking at what risk wanted and what was already on our Archer roadmap, but also thinking about our joint focuses was really important to us. And aligning our governance across the business programme and the Archer programme. So at the moment we have me as service owner operating at both committee levels, but also, and there are other links here, but also at a grassroots level, we have administrators who are almost like super users for each business process, each risk assurance and compliance process, operating together as a change board, but also they form part of the working groups for specific issues. For example, one of the working groups will be about how we own and manage control records, how we create a common assessment of controls across the second line, how that operates with the third line. So these experts in Archer and also experts in risk assurance and control will also form part of the working group, or be part of those working groups, to make sure that those decisions are taken with full knowledge of how Archer operates and what we can do to make sure that both of these are aligned going forward. And it's absolutely key that they are aligned. And then we've developed our reporting dashboards together, and this is an example where our business transformation team helps to set the requirements and the context and reviews the dashboards before sign off, whereas the Archer programme team looks after the framework within which these dashboards are created and maintained to provide consistency across all of them, and the production, puts them into production and continuously develops and supports them. So it's really key that we've had our things aligned. I'm not going to go too much through our strategy, but just to say that in everything that we do, we continuously develop Archer through change and enhancement. And that means that we not only capture the requirements, but this piece of pressure testing every single change request and implementation aspect has to go through a governance pressure test to make sure it's fit for purpose and it meets the vision and it meets our business priorities before we enable that with the technology and then accelerate the business impact of it through rolling it out.
We've had a few questions come through on Slido. There's also been a couple of questions come through on the chat as well, so we'll try and cover those. Yes, if people can use Slido, that would be great. I guess in terms of the first question, it's looking at, I guess, some of the challenges we've had in implementing it, particularly with different groups. And you mentioned earlier that in putting it in, we were asking people to kind of bend their processes a bit to fit the application. That could be a change for some audit teams. So how did you manage that risk and some potential pushback or engagement issues you get with that approach?
I think having a strong vision has really helped us. I mean, it's really helped us. And, you know, we probably had strong leadership as well. So Mouthy McQuaid here, Dave, you know me well. You know, strong leadership, strong partners, strong support from an engaged steering committee. On that steering committee was the global head of audit, the group financial controller, the chief risk officer, you know, we now have buy-in from the business transformation side, from the Chief Risk Officer and the Chief Finance Officer who are leading that. So it's you know this stuff, all of you. You know that it's tone at the top, and you know that it's leadership that will drive this. And it hasn't been easy. But I think you have to take that two-pronged approach. It's getting people around the table with that strong vision, but on occasions you have to go round them and you have to pull rank a little bit. And we haven't had to do that very much at all. But I was having a conversation this week about colours on the findings on the dashboard. So micro, so tactical, and yet so important that we maintain that consistency, because if we don't all do the same thing and we're not all walking in the same direction, we simply cannot achieve an integrated vision.
Okay. One of the other questions that come through is around kind of system useful. So you mentioned this, but I think you said there are over 15 groups. So you've obviously got quite a diverse user base there. I mean, just what you see as some of those challenges when you've got such a diverse user base in maintaining the system going forward.
You know, one of the main things that you've got to think about, or what this boils down to, is actually it's almost like we're all in the same game. So we're all doing risk assurance and compliance. But the biggest split across those 15 or 35 groups, whatever they'll end up being, is actually the dynamic between an audit and compliance background, whereby your findings are set and you don't change them. The outcomes of an audit are finalised and signed off, and they don't change. Compared to, and same with compliance breaches, that it's a breach, it has outcomes, and you have findings and they don't change. But actually compare that to the risk space, where potentially you have dynamic changing landscape around that risk. You have emerging risks, and you have things that come out of fashion, and you also have things moving up and down in terms of priority for the organisation. So they have quite dynamic needs. And the balance really comes down to that focus of you never change a due date for audit and compliance to you have to change the due date, and you might change it 17 times. And particularly, let's talk about IT assurance. You know, even in the IT risk and assurance space, it can take years for us to get to a solution. You know, it's taken us 3 years to get to this point with Archer. And we've known some of the things that we wanted to do 3 years ago, we're now doing this weekend. So, you know, things do change and due dates do change, and there is dynamism within risk. So I think it boils down to those two things that are a constant tension that have to be managed, rather than it being 15 things that have to be. And it's not easy. I don't have an answer.
I mean, you mentioned...
Sorry, Dave.
You mentioned about how the system handles risk for different users, and there's some come through here about do we mandate a specific risk wording, because you could have a risk that is applicable to multiple parts of the business, such as something common like a HR risk. So how is that dealt with? Are you mandating kind of standards?
So we have champions in every business across National Grid. There are something like 150 risk champions, I think, I think it's across the 2 territories, and something like 400 compliance champions. So you have them in every area. We have compliance and risk communities of practice, where we share information about Archer, and we share information about the risk transformation programme and the compliance transformation programme on this journey. And that sets out the language that we're going to use for guidance in creating those risk descriptions, but also training sessions amongst those champion populations around how we write risk descriptions. And our transformation programme, part of its remit has been to set out guiding principles, so guide rails, and those are 3 to 4 page documents on a particular subject, for example, how to write a risk description, but it's not mandated wording for a particular risk, because the gas business will have differences from the electricity business, although they may both have a data management risk. And we would want to see similar wording. So part of my role as part of the not just the service support, but part of the group assurance and DRM team, because I sit in that centralised business function, risk and compliance function. Part of my role is to do some data quality reviews and to look at and think about if we've got data management as a risk across 15 businesses, to make sure that we haven't got 15 different versions of the same risk, and that we are capable of sharing it. So we are starting to build some quality assurance reviews around that, alongside having guide rails, alongside having training, alongside having communities of practice and champion networks who all talk to each other. It's a multi-factor effort to gain that consensus and that collaboration and that consistency.
Thanks, Maria. There have been questions coming through around how we use it, the value, and how we manage to articulate the value at the offset of the project. However, unfortunately, we have run out of time. But thanks for people sending through their questions on Slido. There's been a lot of questions around the slides coming out as well, so I think those are going to be circulated.
I'm really happy, if this is okay, I'm really happy to take those questions, maybe to answer them in an answer sheet, and have that circulated, or through my LinkedIn as well. So, don't think that your question hasn't been answered. I'm very happy to take those questions and answer them later.
So thank you, Marina. Thank you, David, for a really interesting, really vibrant, and obviously a topic that you are extremely passionate about, and I think you should be extremely proud from what you've described about what you've achieved in that space of time. It is quite truly remarkable, and obviously there is more to do, but I think that's the same in anything that we're trying to implement, or kind of when we're trying to make such a huge sea change in an organisation. I am conscious of time. Just quickly, as a reminder that next week's event, same time, same place, and I hope to see you all there. So from me and the committee, and Marina and David, thank you very much for attending today.